Okay, so now we're going to start doing our watercolour painting. Doesn't matter how you got your drawing down on the paper, here it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix up a nice sky colour. I've got some ultramarine or any kind of dark blue, and I always like a little bit of turquoise in there, just to give it a bit more oomph. So I'm mixing up quite a lot because it's quite a big area, and we're going to make it nice and runny as well. Lots of water in there. Okay, and then with your biggest brush, I always have a rag on hand because you don't necessarily want all the water coming onto the picture, but in this case we do need quite a lot. I'm just going to wet with clean water this section down here, going in and out of the petals. So it's almost like you're colouring in, but just with water. And then a little bit up the side here. Oh, I'm going a little there, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so put plenty on, but you don't want pools of water. You want to be able to still see the grain of the paper showing through. So it's not like a dish of water, it's still a flat surface that's wet. Okay, so just very rough. This is just the background. So I'm going to put this blue on now and come in between some of the petals. While that's drying, we can't put the yellow or the green on yet because it would seep into the wetness of the sky, but what we can do is this section in the middle of the flower. So I'm going to mix up a colour for this middle, which is just a dark brown. And put in there. Just a bit darker one there. So any dark brown that you've got, to make that really intense, I'm going to mix in a bit of Payne's Grey. Payne's Grey is a really, really richly pigmented colour. So we've got some brown, but the shadows of here are really, really dark. It's probably best not to use a neat black. Some people like to use black, some people steer away from it. I'm going to avoid it today, see what happens, because it can sometimes deaden the colour, whereas the blue of Payne's Grey is rather nice. Okay, so we've got plenty there. I'm going to do the same thing again where I use plain water on the area that I want to paint. So a bit more carefully this time because you can see the shape here. Colouring in with invisible water again. Got a nice leaf, nice petal that's sticking out into the middle, which is rather good. So I want that to be yellow, not brown. Make sure I didn't get it wet. I did. So with a slightly smaller brush to give me a bit more control, I'm going to use this lovely dark colour. Let's see what happens. Very nice. Okay, so that's rather more of a dark colour than I was thinking, so I'm going to add in some more brown. You can see that the reddish brown is really over here. So that's where I'm going to put it on my painting. I'm just going to use that neat because it's very a very strong colour. Some nice juicy colours. So I'm just going to drop some more of this in because this part of the sunflower is very dark. So I think you can go really as dark as you like. And I'm going to give it this, put the paint on in this kind of speckledy way. We've got some more brown here, and then here it's a lot lighter, maybe more of an ochre. So we'll put a bit of that on. Go with this brown, and then around here it's also very dark because we've got the shadow of the petals. So let's just put that base colour down. So I might put some of this on neat as well. So this is my shadow colour. It's very, very strong, which I like. A bit of drama. Lovely. So it's quite blue, as you can see. We can always put a bit more brown in. And I want it darker down here as well. Very dark down the bottom because it's in the shadow. So put it on in a sort of speckledy way. Obviously the paint's moving around because there's plenty of water on there. But what we can do is use salt to sprinkle on there, and it will help the paint to dry in a sort of speckled effect. So that's quite appropriate for something like this. So I'm going to do that in a moment. I'm just going to add in a little bit of yellow here. I don't really know what that's going to do. Let's wait and see. And I want more brown around this middle section. It's quite almost a reddish brown here. Maybe I'll add in a bit of this reddish colour. It's just a bit of fun, it's just an experiment. It doesn't matter if it goes wrong. With watercolour you have to embrace the accidents, you have to embrace the happy accidents, because the paint has a mind of its own and you sort of just have to let yourself go with that really, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to get any enjoyment from it. So wherever it ends up you have to say, yes, I meant to do that. And put some speckles on there. Okay, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more colour down here where I've still got some sort of gaps in the paint, but it's fairly dark. I'm quite happy with that. I like the shadow. So now I'm going to use this is coarse sea salt. You can just use table salt, you just get bigger speckles. Where I actually don't want it is on the sky. So if any goes on the sky while it's still wet, I'm going to move that. And this will take a little while to dry. So now is a really good time for a cup of tea. There you go, so I'm just going to make sure there's none on the sky, which I don't think there were. I've got some spare salt there. Put that down. There we go, and you can see that what happens is where the salt goes, the paint is sort of sucked to it. And then when you eventually take that salt away, you'll have a little sort of speckle left in the colour of the paint. So, if the sky is dry, I think I might be able to do the leaf and the stalk right now, which will be quite handy. Then that can be drying as well. So I've got a nice green that I've already mixed up here. I always leave my watercolours on the palette, because when you next pick up your palette to paint, you've got some interesting colours there that aren't straight out of the box. This is actually quite a dark green here. So I'm going to do the same thing again with the water, where I apply the water with no paint first. This is called the wet in wet technique, where you're applying paint to a wet surface. Some people like it, some people prefer to work with the paint, with the paper dry. You get more control over the paint if it's dry, but you get some interesting effects if the paper is wet. So I've gradually over the years moved more towards the wet. Because you do get some nice results. Well, that's really a bit too wet. I've got some of that. Okay. If you can see the paint just sort of swimming around, it's probably a little bit too wet. This will dry, everything you do will dry lighter than when you first put it on, so even this really dark area here. So don't worry that it appears to be very dark. There we go. And then I'm going to do this stalk here. Okay, and then we've got our big stalk here, and the stalk comes in and here. Oh, we've missed a bit of sky out there. Put that in a minute. So that's a bit of stalk, and then it comes out. Oops. You can see that even with proper watercolour paper, this is the paper is bending and buckling. It's just something you have to get on with, really. And you can get very expensive paper that's so thick that it won't bend, but most of the time it's not really a problem. Okay, so I'm going to leave that quite light for the moment. Go back to the leaf. So we've got, it's actually in shadow, isn't it? So we've got shadows down here. So I might add in a little bit of this Payne's grey to darken this down. This part's very dark. And then we've got a bit of light along the edge. That's probably fine. This is dark along the sides and light in the middle. So we can do that. And then this one is very dark because it's in the shadow. The paper's still wet, so this will hopefully not leave any lines or marks. It will just get blended in. There we go. So I'll just soften that with a bit of water down the middle. Lovely, and I must remember to put that bit of sky in when the green has dried. So I'm going to leave that to dry for the moment. We've let the blue, the green and the middle dry. I can see that this is still wet around each piece of salt, but that shouldn't be a problem because the yellow colour I'm going to put now is only going to touch the edge here. So largely that shouldn't be a problem. If you wanted to, you could leave this for a really long time and brush the salt off and carry on, but for the purposes of this I'm just going to carry on now. So the first thing we're going to do actually is, instead of just painting all the petals, I'm going to paint all of the shadows first and then paint the petals last. And the reason for doing that is I quite like doing it that way. And it just makes a nice effect. So I need to mix up a colour, which is this shadow colour here, which is a really odd colour. It's difficult to see what that is. You can try and isolate it. If you do, you'll find it's a sort of murky brown. So what I'm going to do is take a yellow, a nice bright yellow, and add something which is opposite that colour on the colour wheel. So here is the colour wheel. We've got yellow here, and exactly opposite is violet, so a nice deep purple. And if I mix those two together, I should get a dark version of the yellow. Let's see what happens. Oh, wasn't enough there. Wake up the purple with a bit of water and add it in. Ooh. Okay, so I think if you were to put that next to it on the thing, you would find that that's actually pretty good. I'm going to make it slightly darker because I do like a bit of drama. That's quite good. So for this particular part of the painting, I'm not going to use the wet in wet technique. So we used wet in wet for the sky, we used it for the leaf and for the middle. But for the petals, I'm not going to do that because I actually want these shadows to be nice and crisp. So I haven't drawn them on here, I'm just going to do them by eye, but you can draw them on if you prefer, if it gives you a bit more confidence. So I'm just going to start, I've still got my lines across here, so I'm just imagining where the line is and thinking, right, I'm going to make sure I know which petal I'm on, and I'm going to put those shadows on now. So I'm using it dry, and the shadows come down and they go across the petal like that. This is quite a good way to show that you've got some different surfaces that are higher or lower from each other. That one was in the background, so the shadow sort of bumped across it at a different rate. And then this one has got its edge in shadow as well. So, oops. Now I've done those three like that, I'm also going to put on the shadows that come down from the tip of the petal in the same colour. So while this is wet, this will all just blend in. You can always just go over it again. So, it looks very strange at the moment. I could potentially have some more of these sort of stripy lines. I could always put those in later if I feel like they're really missing. So, oh, I haven't got any space left on my little palette, so I'm just going to have to clean one off. My rag. This area has dried, so I can start putting the yellow on now. I've got a nice clean yellow. This one I feel is actually a little, oh, it's pretty good. I thought this one was too light. I've got a more goldy coloured one that I could always add in if I need it. So as this is such a strong colour, you can almost use this neat really. I'm going to go right over the shadow area as well. Give that another boost of yellow. Alright, that's a beautiful colour. It's a happy, happy colour. Okay. Okay, not too bad. Just keep going. So this one here I noticed had this more orangey colour. So while these are still wet, I could mix a little bit of that up. Ooh. Try not to scrub too much over the colours that are already down on the paper because that might start to come off again and mix back in, which you probably don't really want. Oh yeah, so that's a slightly more sort of golden. That's quite nice, gives it a bit more interest, just putting that other yellow in there. But I'm going to stick to this lighter yellow for my main body. This is completely dried now, so I'm going to remove the salt from here and see if we've got a nice speckledy. Oh, you have to rub it quite hard. Okay, so I'm just going to tip that into here. See if I can get the rest of that off. Some of it's really stuck. Okay, so it's left quite a sort of sporadic spotty finish. I think I was hoping for it to be a bit more spotty than that. I suppose I could have put more on. But that is the nature of experimenting with techniques like the salt. You just end up with what you end up with, and there's not much you can do about it. And that's, I mean, that's quite nice from a distance. It looks quite speckledy. So let me just of the salt. There we go. So just going to think about now what needs doing to just finish this off. So I was just adding some of this darker yellow when the camera stopped working, so I'm just going to carry on doing that. There's some of this warmer yellow tone around the top here and just where it joins onto the flower, to the middle of the flower there. This is the warmer colour up here. We've got some on here and the back up there. Oops. And anywhere else. That's probably, I'll put some down here already. Got a little bit here, I think, where the salt was touching. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. And then I just wanted to go back and with this smaller brush touch up some of the little shadowy bits that maybe didn't get added in. So I'm just going to add into that darker bit there. If we add in another layer of this shadow, we will get a darker bit of shadow. So there's some areas where I actually want the shadow to be slightly darker, and I'm going to do that now. So just wake up the purple. This is our purple and yellow again. There we go. So around the bottom of the flower here, I noticed that these shadows are slightly darker, and so I am just going to use a brush to add them in. And here, and then where these petals are overlapping each other, you get rather a nice kind of dark shadow where they're growing out of the main body of the flower. Okay, so this petal here I noticed had got a little line coming down that we had missed. This one had a little line there, got that one there, and then this one. This had just to go across like that, and a little bit round there. I've just got the difference between sort of petals laying over other petals here, where it's slightly darker in some places. And that's just sort of just a hint, really. Okay. Nice. I like the shadow. The other thing I've noticed is, well, I've still missed my bit of blue sky off, so that was this little bit in here got missed, didn't it? Okay. And the other thing is that the dark green leaf has dried very pale, and I would like that to be a bit darker. I don't know what green this was, it's one of these. Mix up a bit more green and add in a bit of Payne's Grey again. So give that quite dark. It's almost like a blue. But as I can see on here, this is actually quite a dark leaf because it is in the shade. Just going to leave the lighter colour to be the vein there. Lovely, and a bit on here. Oops. This one looks almost invisible. Put that one in. Okay, so this one I got confused with which was the leaf and which was the petal there. So it doesn't need to be green now, it's actually the brown colour. Lovely, and the other thing that's really needs to be a lot darker is this. Bit more green. Ooh, it's very dark. Bit more green in there. Always dries lighter, so you can go full on dramatic and it'll probably still be fine. Probably. And then that little bit in there. I think that is done. Oops, I've accidentally got green in the sky, so I'm just going to lift that out by wetting it and dabbing with my bit of rag. Lovely, and then when it's completely dry, you can rub out some of your pencil lines additionally if you want. But I think that's probably all I'm going to do. Got some, she says, immediately doing something else. Just got some little bits that have been lost here with the different layers of the petals. Just put that. And that petal there, which was our really bright coloured one, it's actually not coming up very bright, so I'm going to add a bit of more, add another layer of yellow to it. Okay. Knowing when to stop is difficult. But I think that's it.